All right, let's quickly bring in our guest who is joining us from Abuja. Let's quickly bring in former Director General of the National Broadcasting Commission and the CEO of the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, Muda Yusufa. First of all, let's have Danladi Bako. Good to have you on the program this evening. So we're looking at the industrial action taken by the NLC over the new national minimum wage. Give us a bit of a historical background of this impasse between the both parties, and where do you see this leading to?
Well, good evening. Good evening, Nigerians, and good evening, BKO and the rest of the colleagues in the studio, my colleagues in the studio. I want to align with the thoughts of so many people who believe that much as you want to strike, strike is a last resort on any issue, on any labor matters. We've been at this for quite some time, and I do know that efforts have been made to create an organic solution that treats everybody, not the 1.2 million Nigerians that are workers. Out of the 200 million Nigerians estimated, about only 1.2 are workers, federal, local government, state government, corporate bodies, etc. So if you're talking about minimum wage, you're talking about just dealing with those workers. Now, the organized private sector that have lots of other people that are not in government work and cannot afford even 100,000. At the last meeting that they had with the tripartite meeting, I am aware that even organized private sector could not even yield beyond 60,000 because at that level, the messengers, the cleaners, the younger people, the lower people, the very least paid workers would not be able to, they're not going to be able to be given 494,000 according to Labour. So there has to be a rethink. I think that Labour has been a little, I think from where we're coming from, they had seen an Ayuba Waba regime that was a little bit lackluster and mild. So they're trying to restore that energy of Labour in the past where everything was strike first, strike first, strike first. So they want to make a name. They saw an Adam Soshomole become an NLC president from there to Government House. So I think at the back of some people's minds, they think that one of the best ways to make a name and to fight in, whatever, is to put everybody on edge. Right now, as we speak, the country has almost come to a standstill. Nobody is benefiting because eventually, I can assure you almost assuredly, 100%, that the government is not likely to be able to pay 494,000, and Labour will have to look for a way to come down on that price, that rate, that figure, and the government will have to look for a way to yield further. But most importantly, you're going to have to create a system, an environment, an ecosystem that provides for better roads, cheaper healthcare, food for the people, cheaper foodstuffs, good transportation, good education. And I think to a large extent, part of the government program has been about 20 to 50% of that idea. Whether the CNG buses that will reduce transportation is going to make that kind of effect is another matter. But there's a plan on ground to be able to give you cheaper transport. I think Labour needed to wait a little longer, give themselves one more month, maybe till the end of July, and see whether government will fulfill its promise.
Yeah, well said. But let me quickly ask you this, because, there are concerns that the national grid being shut down by Labour, the Labour Union, is really rascally, according to BKO right here in the studio. But what are your thoughts on this, and what do you think should have been the best approach on the part of Labour, if at all they are insisting on a new national minimum wage?
First of all, I saw the breakdown of what they had listed. They tried to talk about food per person per meal, 300 naira per meal for three meals in a day times 5 number of people in a family. They did all those calculations. Now, those calculations are all right by their own standards, but I worked on those calculations and I cut them down on my own based on what I know and the people that I feed and the people that are under me. And I came down, I could reduce that 494, personally calculate them and come down to 150. Conveniently, because the rates they gave the schools, the healthcare, there's so many things that they rated. Housing, for God's sake, some people that live in, do you know where Takatuku in Bodinga is in Sokoto State? Do you know where Chimola is? Do you know where some parts of Focados or even Tai Eleme? The costing of accommodation is not uniform all over the country. So you're not talking about, uniform, those high figures they put there in housing, healthcare. No. I think they're unrealistic. I think right. BKO knows that once upon a time, Labour was giving money or they were giving grants to buy buses to run their own bus service. All those buses have disappeared. My first question, where are those buses? Are you saying that Labour did not have a capacity administratively to even run the buses they were running those 5-10 years ago? Right. That tells you how difficult administration can be. So they needed to have gone to a fine approach. I would have thought that they should come down, ask for a lower price. I don't think that realistically any government can pay more than 100,000, realistically.
Well, let me quickly bring in our next guest, the CEO of Center for Promotion of Private Enterprises, Muda Yusuf. Good to have you on the program this evening. So now we understand that the government has warned that a higher minimum wage could lead to more job losses. Well, first off, how valid are these concerns and how do you think this can be mitigated, and what do you think could have been the right way to approach this?
Mr. Danladi Baku. Well, I think we need to situate this in appropriate context. Because in this kind of negotiation, we need to be very realistic. Yes, there is a major risk of job losses. There is no doubt about that. If we impose an unrealistic wage on the employers, I mean, they don't have any other option than to lay off workers. And I don't think that is a good option, a good alternative that Labour will also welcome, just as BKO said. But in all of this, the issue of affordability is key. You can't give what you don't have. Whether it's a living wage, whether it's not a living wage, whether you can cope with your basic services, you can't give what you don't have. We have some states, as we speak today, even before all this conversation around minimum wage, about 80% of their resources are spent on payment of salaries. What happens to the rest of the citizens? What happens to infrastructure? What happens to the provision of education, health services, roads, supporting agriculture, and so many other things? This economy or this country is not only about workers who are on the payroll. Yeah. And just as we have been told, we are talking about just maybe 5% or even less. Yeah. So,
all right, he seems to have a little bit of connectivity issues with Muda Yusuf.
Yeah.
Okay, let's have the thoughts of Mr. Danladi Baku on this matter, because I know definitely from what he's given us so far, that's from Muda Yusuf, this might be unrealistic on the part of the government and of course the private sector if we're to talk about the minimum wage being paid at 494,000 naira. But let's look at the incentives, the non-monetary incentives that the government is promising Labour to also provide, given its demands. Do you think perhaps the government can be trusted? Because that is the case here that Labour insists to say that we need these monies because we're not sure that most of these incentives will be provided for instance, the CNG buses and every other thing that comes with it. What are your thoughts? I
do agree, Esther. The bottom line remains that a large part of the population of Nigeria are not in the cities, they are not in government work. Where they occur in organized private sector, Dr. Muda Yusuf has told you, it's going to be extremely difficult for each one of those SMEs, each one of those corporate bodies to begin to scale up the salaries from 494. If you're saying that that's the living wage, whether it's living wage or minimum wage, the bottom line is that 80% of debts from other previous regimes, federal, state, have all been accumulated over the years. So even the differentials today of what the removal of subsidy, after government removed subsidy, FAC allocations was somewhere around, before government removed subsidy, there was about 750 billion to share. Now, government has 1.3, 1.4 trillion to share, but half of those monies are going back as withdrawals, as debt repayments, at debt, and all those kind of stuff have lowered the value of what these governments can pay. So these state governments, all of them, are going to find it difficult because as we speak, so many of them spend their salaries on their allocations on salaries. We can only appeal that more integral things should be done to generate IGR. Get Sokoto, Zamfara, Kebbi State to form a fertilizer company. There's everything you need for a fertilizer company in that region. Get another one to set up. There are some tomato company. Oyo, Ogun, and Ondo should set up a big cocoa company so that they can get chocolates done in Nigeria, processed from scratch to finish, and export them. Because our GDP is far too low. There's just no way we can survive with the kind of GDP we have, with our forex and with the kind of overloads we have.
Right, let me hold your thoughts for now. Let's quickly go to Mr. Muda Yusuf. Now, let's get your perspective on the likely implications this increase would have on the economy. Talk to us on this, particularly as it concerns a possibility of inflation and, of course, economic instability.
Doctor, let's crunch the numbers. If you are to pay even 200,000 or 150,000, what impact would that have on our finances, on the nation's finances, and even the finances of the states?
Well, I may not be able to give you the exact numbers, but I can tell you straight away that will wipe out the totality of the resources of particularly the sub-nations. That is one. Secondly, it's going to have a very significant impact on inflation. If we are talking about this kind of numbers, it's going to have a significant impact on inflation. Because, and once you have that, be back to square one. Because the purchasing power will now become weaker, and you come back again to agitate for more wages. Thirdly, there's a psychological pricing component of it. Once the average market men or women hear that it's hitting headlines that wages have increased, certainly they will increase their prices. Forget about the economics of it. Psychologically, they believe that people now have more money and therefore prices have to go up and they need their own share of that. Thirdly, when we are talking about this minimum wage, it's not just about the minimum wage. That's what you call the consequential adjustment.
Yes.
Once you have this floor, you have to adjust all other salaries, which are even bigger, up to the level of even permanent secretary.
Yes.
That is multiples of what we are talking about. We are talking about trillions of naira. So these things are simply not realistic. So we have to go back to the drawing board. And I must come back to the point that Biko made. We need to do things according to law. Nobody is above the law, not even the labor unions. I mean, how can you have the audacity, because you are talking of minimum wage, to go and switch off the national grid? That's a national security issue. just because of minimum wage. Then you are shutting down the ports, you are shutting down the airports.
It's unheard of.
I think that is carrying it too far. And I think people need to be told that we are a nation governed by law.
Yeah.
Even as trade unions, you are not above the law. PKO quoted a portion of the law. And we need to make sure that people respect the law. So that, for me, I think is extremely, very, very important.
Right. Point
And
taken.
we are talking about a country. Yeah.
Right. So to give your final thoughts on this now, how do you think both sides can align to the expectations and perhaps avoid deadlock, if at all they would reconvene for another meeting?
No, first, the negotiation has to continue more realistically. You have to put realistic options on the table. Secondly, there is the discussion around the cost of living issues. And luckily, there is a proposal being prepared for the executive order by the president. It's a draft presidential executive order on inflation reduction and price stability. It has a lot of very interesting provisions, concessions from the fiscal policy side on how to bring down the cost of living, the cost of food, the cost of raw materials, the cost of machinery for manufacturing, the cost of even things that have to do with vehicles, and even a window to import paddy rice for 6 months to be able to increase the level of rice production and rice milling. These are part of the things that are in the works. So when we are having this kind of conversation, labor should also be discussing these kind of issues so that you have something that benefits everybody, that is more inclusive, that is not just narrowed down to people who are just taking salaries, something that involves everybody so that they can get the buy-in of all the citizens. These things are already in the works. So we need to see the government to see this kind of things through so that the cost of living can come down. I think these are the more critical things.
Right. Well said. Thank you so much, Mr. Muda Yusuf, for your perspective. Let me quickly get the thoughts of Mr. Danladi Bako. Final thoughts on the lessons you think that can be learned from this impasse and for future wage negotiations. What can you tell us? The lessons that can be learned from it?
Yeah, well, the bottom line remains that.
So let me say something. As a practicing journalist, you are very much on top of the situation when General Babangida punished NEPA staff for
shutting down the national grid,
industrial action, despite being an essential service. Can you try and to bring us up to speed with what happened at that time? And
You know, as I've said,
about what they
BKO, thank you very much. As I said several times in the last 5 years, we're lucky democracy is in place. Some of the things that we do today, a regime that is not a democratic civilian regime will not tolerate them. Even in certain regimes where they are civilian but they are dictatorial, they would look for a way to punish these people. And those days, it was very clear. The government was very clear in its mind that national security, there are issues that involve national. You cannot shut down a national grid. Indeed, at one point, if you stop other people from going to work, that's also an offense because you're denying them their right. Every civil servant that goes to work has a right to appear. You can't get a band of members of union that stop me from entering my office and I don't take them to court, or I don't get another set of 10 people to carry sticks and knives and chase them out of the place. Labor cannot force people not to do their duties. Labor should not force people to obey. It's an optional thing. It's your right. You cannot force people to follow your own line. They might be members of the union, but they might not like that line of action you're taking. So they have to expand. And quite clearly, as you rightly observed, the issue of shutting off national grid. In fact, I knew from yesterday about this time that they were going to shut the national grid down. I mean, I was saying to myself, what happened? Can these guys, way back, about 8, 10 of them would have been arrested by midnight. Way back. I mean, and nobody would do anything about it. And the people that even arrested the NEPA guys, they're still around till today. They're alive and they're fine. And they'll be smiling and say, what kind of things does democracy bring to us? In the name of democracy, in the name of ILO, in the name of all these things, you prosecute all sorts of criminality. Shutting down a national grid is criminal because you're denying us of our rights to have electricity.
Right, and that's where
Let's leave it at that. But
yeah, thank you so much.
thank you. Thank you, Esther. Thank you, BKO. Thank you, everybody else.
Mr. Dan Ladit-Bako, for your insights. And of course, I'd like to thank CEO of Center for Promotion of Private Enterprise, Muda Yusuf, all joining us all the way via Zoom. Thank you so much for your perspectives. Well, before